Hey guys, Frosty Knives here, back with another video, and today we're going to be taking a look at an often requested book to review. So today we are going to be taking a look at Stephen King's and Peter Straub's sequel to The Talisman, Black House. And just like some of the other videos that I've done, just like Swan Song and just like the Tommyknockers, there's going to be two videos. It's going to be a spoiler-free video, which is this one. And then there's going to be a spoiler video because you really cannot talk about this book without really delving deep into the subject material, and that includes spoilers. So this will be a service review, and then we'll see a spoiler review where we'll really get into the meat of things. So this book was published 2001. And this book clocks in at 625 pages. And it is a sequel to The Talisman. So just very briefly, what the story is about. This is an adult Jack Sawyer that we first met in 1981 in The Talisman. He is now 31 years old. He is a retired homicide detective from Los Angeles. He moves to French Landing, Wisconsin. So right off the bat, it's in a different setting. This is not does not take place in Maine like most of King's books do, but this takes place in Wisconsin. And so we see an older Jack, and he's moved. He's retired. He's very good at his job, but he's forgotten. He's grown up, and he's forgotten the magic, and he's forgotten his time in the territories. And he doesn't really want to get involved. He's put crime and police work behind him. He's moved on to this little town. He just wants to live out a quiet life and forget, just stay away from all of the hoopla of that. But it turns out that French Landing has a problem, and French Landing has a serial killer. There is a serial killer in French Landing that has modeled himself after Albert Fish. He's been nicknamed the Fisherman, and he has abducted and murdered and cannibalized, just like Albert Fish, 3 children at the beginning of the story. He's abducted 2 and murdered 2, then there's the 3rd one, and then eventually there's a 4th one. So there's 4 children that are abducted by the fisherman, and the police there, they want Jack to get involved because he's the chief of police, Dale, is friends with Jack, and Jack doesn't want to get involved. Jack doesn't want to get involved in police work anymore. He just wants to let that section of his life go by. And eventually, over the course of the story, he eventually gets drawn in to the search for the missing child and the search for the fisherman, and that's essentially the story. It's there's the serial killer, and there's Jack, and he helps French Landing to find out who and what and where the fisherman is, and to possibly save the final child, Tyler Marshall, that was abducted. Tried to save him from being murdered and cannibalized like all the others. That is a surface view of basically what the story is. Now, unlike The Talisman, which was a straight-up fantasy book, right? That was a fantasy novel that took Jack into the territories, an alternate version of America, and there were some fantastical things going on. This is not a fantasy book. This is a straight up, this is mostly a horror book because there's a lot of horrible images and things that happen in this book. The fisherman is a very vicious and evil and cruel villain. There's an even more vicious and more cruel villain behind the fisherman. There's a lot of horror that goes on, a lot of visceral things, a lot of violence. Then there's the whole idea of Black House, which is where the fisherman lives, and there's a lot of supernatural things that are going on with Black House and its surroundings that we'll talk about in another video, and the things that are going on there. So this is a very much a supernatural thriller slash horror book with a lot of horror elements. So if you go into this book expecting to get a read just like The Talisman, where you're going to be involved into in a fantasy world like the first book, you're not going to get that. This is dark. This is supernatural. This has horror in it. There's violence in it. There's very little in the way of fantasy as you knew it in The Talisman. That's not to say that this is not a good book. I will say that having read this book and not remembering 99% of what happens in this book, it makes me realize that I don't think I ever read it before. This may, in fact, have been the first time that I've read Black House. It's not usual for me to go into a Stephen King novel to do a reread for one of these videos and remember nothing. I remembered virtually nothing about this book, which makes me think that I never read it. And so I'm glad I did read it because it was very interesting. There's a lot of interesting things going on in this book. As a thriller book, as a horror book, as a book with supernatural elements and a murder mystery and things like that, it's not bad. I thought it was just like the first book, just like The Talisman. It was very well written. It's hard to tell which is Stephen King and which is Peter Straub. There are moments in the book where you're reading it and the voice feels very strongly like Stephen King. And then there are other moments in the book where you're reading it and it doesn't feel like King at all. So I'm sort of assuming that that's Peter Straub coming through. I have not read a lot of Peter Straub's work on his own. I think I read Ghost Story years ago and I really don't remember much of it. So I couldn't really tell. I could tell when I thought King was writing and King's voice was coming through, and then everything else that didn't really resonate as King, I just assumed was Straub. The way the book is written, I think a lot of people may have been turned off by the way the book is written, because the way the book is written, and it's hard to describe, it's written in sort of a present tense manner, but the way that they wrote it is that it's like you are sort of flying over French Landing on the wings of a bird or a drone or something. You're sort of flying in, and they say, here is French Landing, and they start, and you're flying over the town, and you start describing the areas and the people that are in the town and some of their little backstories and some of the places, and you're really sort of floating over this story, and as the story is going through, you're kind of following along. It's almost like a book on rails, right? Almost like you're being led on a roller coaster, where you get into the roller coaster and the roller coaster is driving you through, and you're seeing the things around as you're going through, like a coaster or a haunted mansion where you're being led along a track. And you're experiencing the story as you're seeing it, as you're going along this track. That's almost how this book is written. And it was very jarring in the beginning when you're reading that, because it's sort of like present tense. Here we are, look over there, that's something. And over there on your left, that's something else. It's like a narrator type voice where they're saying, look over there, look at these people, and look at this town. And we'll talk a little bit about this one and that one. And we'll tell you a little bit about their life. And then they get into the story as it unfolds. It's a very unique way of writing a story and telling a story. It was very jarring in the beginning. A lot of people had problems with that type of voice and that type of way that the story was presented. But as you get into it, it's less noticeable, and it just sort of takes you along on the ride. So if you want to just sit back like you're in a haunted mansion, or like you're on a boat ride or a river cruise, and you just want to sit back and let the story come to you and wash over you and experience it as if you were seeing these horrific events just unfolding in front of your eyes, I think you would enjoy it. It's very interesting. King often plays with narrative structures and narrative ways of doing things, right? Like how he told the story of Carrie through a lot of journals and newspaper clippings and things like that. Like how he told the story of it through two multiple timelines, past and present, and how he told that story in the past story and the present story, and then at the end of it, both of the storylines sort of converge to the final climactic ending. And so he plays around with narratives and narrative structures. And he's doing it again in Black House, where he's taking you along and describing things to you as if he's seeing them for the first time along with you. Like, I guess it would be almost be like having a movie explained to you, or talked to you, or spoken to you. And I think it would be really interesting to see how this book translates as an audiobook. Because the way that it's written makes it sound like it would be very interesting as an audio novel, right? To experience it as an audio book and to listen to them tell you the story. So having never read the book, I thought it was well done. I thought the horror was sufficiently grotesque. I think some of the things that happened in the book were horrifying and were vile. I think the villains were sufficiently villainous. The fisherman was very much an evil character, but not a rote evil character. And then what's behind the fisherman also was very interesting. I think it was well done. It did seem to not drag a little bit, but it was real. It's a slow burn of a book because a lot of the action doesn't really take place until the last act, which is the last, 50 to 100 pages of the book. That's when the last act is. That's when it really sort of ramps up. So it's sort of a slow burn. They're laying the foundations. They're going along. They're going brick by brick, laying the foundations until finally you get to the end. So if you like books that are kind of slow burn, and then you have this sort of final climactic ending, you might enjoy this one. So overall, I think it was a good book. If you're expecting this book even though it's the sequel to The Talisman, if you're expecting a lot of territories in this book, there's not. There's not a lot of territories in the book. Jack doesn't go into the territories a lot, very minimally, once or twice. We'll explain a lot of that in the other video, but you don't spend a lot of time in the territories. You spend most of the time in our world, in this world, and then you spend the final act of the book in another place, but not the territories. So I'm going to leave that there. Overall, I think it was a good book. I think it was well written. I think if you can get past the slow pace, I think if you can get past the narrative style, I think you're in for a real treat, and I think you're going to get a really big reward at the end. So if you've never read Black House, I think it's well worth your time to read it. I did give it a 5 out of 5 on Goodreads. I do think you should read it. I do think you should own it. I do think it is well worth your time to invest in reading this book. I think it is well done. And I think the horror is top-notch. I think the violence is top-notch. I think the villains are top-notch. Jack is really good. His cast of characters are really good. It's fun to see a Stephen King novel that doesn't take place in Maine, takes place in another state, takes place in Wisconsin. So that's a little different. That's new. That's fresh. That's something to look forward to. So I would definitely say this is a must-read for King fans. that it's well worth your time. You're going to get a lot out of it, and it is a well written book, and there is rumor that there's going to be a part 3, that this is going to turn into a trilogy, although I don't know where that stands at this point, or even if this needs a trilogy. We'll talk about that in the other video. So I gave this a 5 out of 5 on Goodreads, and I definitely think it's worth your time to pick this up and to read it and to put it in your collection. So guys, that is my review of Stephen King's / Peter Straub's Black House. Hope you enjoyed the video. Pop on over to the spoiler review if you want to want to hear about the rest of Black House. And as always, if you liked the video, thank you for watching. If you've liked it, share it around, tell your friends, tell your enemies, share, like, subscribe, and as always, I will see you in the next video.